Well, hello everyone. I wanted to put together a video here to talk a little bit about the history behind intelligence testing. There are quite a few facets that can be discussed, and there's a lot of material, a lot of men and women that can be brought up. But I want to give you just sort of a general summary of how intelligence testing got its start, and basically what are some of the biggest tests that we use even to this day. So let's get you started. We always like to think that a lot of the neat things in the world started here in the United States, but just to be fair, intelligence testing is actually not one of them. Intelligence testing got its start back in France right around the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s. There is some debate about what the exact year is, but we're not going to worry about that. The Ministry of Education in France was working to put together some new types of programs, basically classes that were designed for students who were falling behind, we would call remedial classes. And they're actually even working on creating classes that one would refer to as accelerated classes for people who were ahead. But the big question was, if you're going to create these classes, how do you decide who stays in the average class, who goes to the accelerated class, and who goes to the remedial? We needed to come up with a test, a single test that basically could be used with people of a lot of different ages. We didn't want to create a test for 8-year-olds and a test for 9-year-olds and a test for 10-year-olds and so on and so forth, but just one general test that could be used to come up with an idea of where a student should be. And basically, the Ministry of Education in France approached this gentleman, Dr. Alfred Binet. He was something of a a psychologist and what we call a psychometrist, a bit of a statistician, and asked him to work at putting together a test of intelligence to be used with many different ages. All right. Along with the help of another gentleman by the name of Theophile Simon. Some people say his name is Theodore Simon, some say Theophile Simon. I don't even have a good picture of him, so I didn't include it here. They set forth to create a test with multiple levels and multiple facets within it to basically determine a person's overall intelligence. Really putting together the test was a challenge, but the big time consuming element of this whole thing was that they had to administer it one-on-one to children to come up with average scores. So you couldn't just give it to a room full of kids sitting at tables, 500 kids in a room, and test 500 kids all at once. A lot of it was done one-on-one, and so it was a very time-consuming process. Took well over a year to do. But once it was all, actually a couple of years, but once it was all done, uh, basically Alfred Binet created a test that he named after himself and his colleague. It's called the Binet-Simon Scale of Intelligence. And what this test did was it really was groundbreaking because it could be used with people of different ages. You didn't have to have different tests for different ages. You could just use one test. And what this test did was it came up with what we would refer to as a person's mental age. Some call it MA, mental age. So if you took the Binet-Simon scale of intelligence and you were 10 years old today, okay, today was your birthday, you turned 10, and you have the mental abilities, the mental age of a 12-year-old, then maybe you could benefit from moving up to an accelerated class. If you had another child who was 10 years old and he or she had the mental age of an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old, you might decide to put them in a remedial class to hopefully get them up to speed. So that's one of the big things that the original test offered. But it started there in France. Well, eventually testing came to the United States, and really a big person who brought it here or influenced that was a gentleman by the name of Lewis Terman. Terman worked at what was called, the name sort of varies depending on who you listen to, but Stanford Teachers College is the one that I had heard. We would refer to it today as Stanford University. But there at the Stanford College, Lewis Terman had heard about this test and he wanted to get his hands on this Binet-Simon scale of intelligence. He wanted to see what it was all about. So he actually, as I understand, he ordered a copy of the test by wire and had to wire the money to the Ministry of Education, and they agreed to send it on over. Some say it took upwards of about 6.5 months for the test to arrive. And I often chuckle, a lot of people today, if you told them that you order something now and you're going to get it in 6 months, would probably say, you know what, don't worry about it, forget it. But back then, that wouldn't have been such a surprising thing to happen. Terman got hold of the Binet-Simons test of intelligence and looked it over. And one of the first things he realized was that this test was written in French. He did not necessarily speak French, but he did get the test translated. And as he had the test translated and thoroughly looked it over, he realized that a lot of the questions did not apply. They did not apply to uh, living in this new state of California. They were more centered around living in France and some of the elements of France. And so he decided to completely revamp and revise the test. With the help of a colleague of his by the name of Henry Goddard, Goddard and Terman set forth to basically redo the entire test and update questions and change some of the format to work better with what they thought would work well here in the U.S. Once that was done, they then had to turn around and create some average scores. And so they too had to start testing people to turn around and come up with the idea of what would be the average score for an 8-year-old, for a boy or girl who's 8 years, 6 months old, a 9-year-old, and so on and so forth, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, so on. It actually took them quite a while to get all the average scores that they needed because once again they had to be administered one-on-one. But the ultimate product that they came up with, they actually named after its originator, Alfred Binet, and the school that helped them so much that basically handed them the keys to the college and said, just use the building as you need. They called it the Stanford Binet. And believe it or not, the Stanford Binet is still in use today. All right, you can turn around and go take graduate level classes if you are interested. You have to obviously have all the prerequisites to get into those classes, but you could turn around and take classes and learn how to administer the Stanford Binet. I think it's gone through at least 4 major revisions and numerous minor revisions. So many of the questions that you saw on the test in the early 1900s have all been changed to update to the present. But one of the things that really set the Stanford Binet apart was it did not determine mental age at all alone. What it actually determined was what we call IQ. Now, IQ, if you remember, stands for intelligence quotient. IQ, intelligence quotient. And this is a mathematical number to help you determine a person's overall level of intelligence. And the way it works is like this, okay? This is the formula for IQ. MA stands for mental age. And the mental age score that you get comes from testing someone and seeing how they do on the different subtests and how many questions they get right in a timely manner. So you take that score, say someone turns around and gets a score, the mental age of a 10-year-old. We said that earlier. You divide from that your chronological age, or CA. CA, chronological age, is your actual physical age, how old you are, all right? Let's say you turn around and have someone who is 10 years old, all right? So their mental age is 10 years old. You divide from that their actual physical age, their chronological age, say 10 years old, and that's going to give you a fraction most of the time. And we don't want to deal with fractions, so we multiply the whole thing times 100 to get us back to whole numbers. And that's how you come up with IQ. Now, one of the things that was a problem with the Stanford Binet, and in fact, it was a very, very good test, but it didn't work well for adults because some adults, the way the Stanford Binet is designed, is that as you go through a given section of the test, you should normally find yourself starting off with easy questions that get harder and harder and harder. And you may eventually get to a point where basically you no longer can get them right. Now, if you, as an adult, took a children's test, you may find yourself in a situation where you keep answering questions even though they're getting harder, you're getting them right. You might actually run out of questions in a given section and you're still getting them right. We would never know if you were almost at the top of your intellect and just happened to run out of questions, or if you could have gone a lot farther. In essence, the Stanford Binet isn't the best test necessarily for adults. So when it came to creating a test designed for adults, I want to introduce to you Dr. David Wexler. Dr. Wexler realized that we didn't have a good overall test for adults. And so he set forth, along with his team, to come up with basically a test that would work better with people, say, age 16 and up, rather than just children. He worked for many years. He had to come up with average scores. It took quite a bit of time. But what he ultimately created what is called the Wexler Adult Intelligence Scale. Okay, the Wexler Adult Intelligence Scale. It's typically designed for ages 16 and above. I was talking with some of my colleagues that do a lot of testing, and they said, yeah, 16 to above is what it is, and so I include that here. It is referred to by some people as the WAIS, W-A-I-S, as an acronym, an abbreviation, and the R there stands for revised. So the WAIS-R, the Wexler Adult Intelligence Scale Revised, is one of the products that is still in use today. Like the Stanford Binet, you can go learn how to administer the Wexler or the WAIS and turn around and derive an IQ score for your subjects. All right, it too has and uses an IQ score. All right. Wexler decided, why should Lewis Terman and the others have some of the best tests? Why don't I create a test for children? And so he really didn't stop with the WAIS. He actually created also what is called the Wexler Intelligence Scale for Children. All right, or the WISC. The R stands for revised. The Wexler Intelligence Scale for Children, I am told, works best with children aged 6 to 16. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, what if you have a 16-year-old? What test do you use? If you're a test administrator, you're a psychologist that does a lot of testing, you could choose whichever one you think is the best product for your student, for your subject in that regard. All right. The WISC, the Wexler Intelligence Scale for Children, just like the WAIS, offers an IQ score. All right, it gives you an idea of how a person is doing in that category. So both the WAIS and the WISC offer an IQ. This last product, not necessarily so. Uh, Wexler created what is called the Wexler Primary and Preschool Scale of Intelligence. I'm told it works best for children ages 4 to 7. And yes, I know there's a little overlap between ages 4 to 7 and ages 6 to 16 with the WISC. Once again, I'm told by colleagues that that is pretty common, and you sort of use whatever test you think best fits. Some people refer to this as the WIPSI because the WIPSI turns around and is a good way of gauging general intelligence in preschoolers. The WIPSI does not have an IQ score. It basically results in an intelligence report or a behavioral report, but you really don't come up with a numerical score that is applied. Okay. Now we could talk about other tests. We could talk about the Bailey scale. We could talk about some of the others, but these are some of the major ones, and these are the ones I want you to know for now. All right. Hope all this helps. Quick little history. Take care.